So today we're going to examine the similarities and differences between East Asian and Polish culture. By the end of this video, you're going to realize that we're a lot more similar than you think. So Asians are considered the perfect immigrants in Poland for many reasons. We have very similar mentalities on work ethic, which is something that Polish people heavily value. The fact that we tend to obey the rules and not cause any trouble. The fact that we have an interesting cuisine and culture. K-pop is also very big here. And the fact that Poland and East Asian countries historically have had very positive relationships. There's a story about World War II when Japan and Poland were supposed to go to war with each other, but they agreed to just not fight. And even now, Polish people are allowed to go into China without a visa for 15 days. So let's talk about food for a little bit. In a previous video, I got roasted for saying that a lot of Polish cuisine doesn't have vegetables, and yes, I've changed my mind on that. Vegetables in Polish cuisine is usually a lot of salads. You have the beet salad, you have coleslaw, you have carrots, whereas in Asian cuisine, we have a lot more diversity in how we cook our vegetables. For example, in Korean cuisine, they have bachan, which is all these side dishes, which can include cucumbers, kimchi, salad, fish cakes. In my opinion, this is my favorite part of Korean cuisine, but we also cook vegetables within our cuisine as well. So it's usually rice, some form of protein, so either fish or meat, and vegetables. A common way that Asian people like to eat is everybody has their own bowl of rice, and we have several dishes on the table for us to share. You guys have probably seen the lazy Susan, which is very common in Chinese restaurants. Let's say you get a noodle dish, right? That is usually for one person. A lot of our cuisine is focused around sharing with other people. Polish food is definitely a lot heavier, mainly focusing on meat, potatoes, and some form of salad. I think the Asian philosophy towards food is more about balance, whereas the Polish philosophy to food is like comfort food, if that makes sense. I've really enjoyed Polish food. It just hits the spot. I love eating in milk bars because you get that traditional Polish cooking. However, I still think Asian food is the best because of how dynamic it is. Okay, so let's talk about social etiquette. Many countries in this part of the world have some roots in communism. For example, the Soviet Union, China, we had communism, in Korea as well. Japan is kind of an outlier in this regard. Because of these roots, in general, we have an overall collective mentality to not stand out and just do what everybody else is doing, versus the West, where it's a lot more focused on the individual. Asians are not violent people in general. I think Polish people are also not violent. Poland is the safest country in Europe right now. However, when alcohol gets involved and people are at football matches, there has to be police everywhere because stabbings and fights are quite common. So I wouldn't say Polish people are violent people, but if they get super drunk and in certain environments, that behavior can come out. One big similarity that we have is how we conduct ourselves in public. In general, East Asian countries and Poland, we value not making a lot of noise in public spaces. In public transportation, or if you're at the mall, everybody is just generally minding their own business, and it's discouraged to make any form of noise or to stand out. In America, this is an issue because we have an attention-based economy, so it's almost rewarded for people to go out there and be a nuisance and be disrespectful to other people because that's what gets clicks, and people find that very entertaining. Whereas in Poland and in East Asia, if you do that, it's heavily frowned upon by society, and you don't really want to embarrass your family like that. So this is one of the core fundamentals of Polish and East Asian society. It's really around this idea of mutual respect, where everybody is free to do what they want as long as you're not really bothering other people. So a lot of people from the West will complain that Polish people or Asian people are very closed off and are not very friendly. But we are just more direct with how we communicate, and when we greet each other, it's more of an acknowledgement of respect. So in Asian culture, what we'll do is we'll bow. You can use your hand sometimes, or you can just kind of bow like this. Whereas in Poland, their version of that is, having a neutral smile and just doing a kind of like a head nod, right? It's an acknowledgement of respect rather than a whole entire pleasantry conversation, right? Like we do in the US. A big difference between China and Poland: if a couple is having a domestic dispute, for example, they're arguing in public, Chinese people will tend to mind their own business and not meddle, even if the guy maybe steps up to hit the woman. Whereas here in Poland, there's a strong intolerance for that. If people are arguing in public, or if a man becomes violent towards a woman, Polish men will step in and try to stop that. And I don't think there's a right or wrong approach, it's just a different in culture. When it comes to religion, Poland is a Catholic society, so a lot of their values are Christian values. There is an exception in Korea where there is a large Christian population there. However, for the most part, our societal philosophy comes from Buddhism and Confucianism. One of the biggest overlaps that we have is our focus on work ethic. I think the roots of this are different. In Asian culture, hard work and academics are ingrained in us from such a young age, whereas I think Polish people value hard work because they've had to constantly build their country after all of the wars and conflicts that they've gone through. Plus, because Poland was historically a poorer country, they've had to move to other countries and they have that immigrant mentality where they have to work hard in order to provide for their family. So a big difference that we have is the focus on studies and education. Polish people are very educated and well informed. A lot of famous Polish historical figures have been generals, a lot of intellectuals, and a lot of famous artists. The focus on education isn't as intense as it is in East Asia. East Asians, we have fame for this. Ever since I was a kid, my schedule was going to English school and then I would go to Chinese school. Studying for us is such a core fundamental of our culture. And this is why we have so many mental health issues in East Asia, because there's so much pressure put onto us from a young age to perform well in school and in career. East Asian societies are extremely competitive and there's a lot of pride put into job title and where you went to school. Asian parents will often brag to each other about their kids based on what school that they went to, if they're a doctor, all of their career accomplishments.
You just moving? Yes, we're moving in for my son's new job. Oh, good. What job? Neurosurgeon. How old your son? 9.
I think here in Poland, education is valued, but it's more about being a good person and treating other people with respect rather than just where you went to school and the job title. So let's talk about relationships. This is a very complicated topic. First off, when it comes to gender roles, I feel like our cultures are quite similar. Men do all of the physical labor and are valued based on their accomplishments and hard work, whereas women traditionally were expected to take care of the household. I do think it's changing nowadays. I guess Japanese women are a little more docile compared to China and Korea. Chinese and Korean women have fame for being very strong, very opinionated, very career driven. If you are an entrepreneur and you want to find a woman who can help do business with you, I think Chinese women are actually the best for this. In Chinese, we have this term called guai, which essentially is used to describe like an obedient, law-obeying man. You can use that word to also describe a dog. That's kind of the similar expectation that we have for East Asian men, that they are hardworking, that they are kind, they follow the rules, emotionally stoic, and just good contributing members to society. I would even make the argument that East Asian men are a lot more reserved than East Asian women. I think in Poland, it's more of a 50-50 split. Polish women are extremely capable, independent, and want to be valued more as a partner rather than 100% traditional, the man is the man and the woman is the woman. However, there's still a healthy respect between the genders. And from what I've noticed, the way that Polish men treat their women is very similar to how a lot of East Asian men treat our women. Very kind, always attentive to your needs. We often show love through acts of service. There's a lot of commonalities here. So when it comes to marriage, I think we vary drastically. In Chinese culture, it is a very materialistic society. When parents evaluate the potential of a husband for their daughter, they're looking at their career accomplishments, if they have a house, how much money they have. Very traditional thinking.
爸妈，这是小陈。
你是哪里毕业？
不错的呀。
服务员，服务员。
哎呀，小陈。
In Korea, I think it's more on a basis of love, but also this duty and responsibility towards the family. Korean dating culture is very intense, almost possessive in a lot of ways. And in Poland, I would say that nowadays it's more of a basis on love and mutual respect. I think views on marriage and kids are changing a lot in East Asian countries because it's so competitive and everything is so expensive. So people are generally not having a lot of kids. Whereas here in Poland, I think the family values are still strong. And even though the birth rate is 1.33, it's almost double of what South Korea's is. And I think Poland in general still has a family-oriented society. I think something important to talk about is the views on cheating. Here in Poland, cheating is heavily frowned upon. It's a Catholic-based society, so the essential mold is monogamy, whereas in East Asia, it's actually different. In Japan, a common mindset is that if a man sleeps with a prostitute, they don't really see that as cheating.
風俗は浮気かどうか。
浮気ではない。隠さなければ浮気じゃない。
なるほど。自分の彼氏が風俗に行ってたらすぐ別れますか？
別れないです。私も彼に浮気するなら風俗に行けって言ったことあります。金払えばいいよって言ったことあります。ね、出会いじゃなくてお金払って言ってるなら別にいいから。なるほど。なんかでも日本の女性の方って縛られたくないみたいな人が多い気がする。 外国って縛り合ってるのが愛みたいなあるじゃないですか。日本人の方は嫌がってるイメージがあるから、重すぎない方がいい。
In China and Korea, it's actually very common for men to have mistresses on the side. And this, I think, comes from the roots of like arranged marriages. You get married with a partner who would be a good fit as your husband or wife. However, you can fulfill your sexual needs in other places. I had this conversation with my mom, and she told me if my dad stepped out sexually, she doesn't want to know about it, just no diseases, no extra families, and everything's good. And it surprised me when I heard that because I grew up in America, which is also a Christian-based society, so we have different views on monogamy. However, I actually think this makes a lot of sense. Trying to find everything in one partner is kind of unrealistic. Try to find someone who's your best friend, who's your emotional equal, who maybe you can do business with, who will be a good parent to your kids, and also someone you're extremely sexually attracted to. I think that's like an impossible ask because we are not that to other people. So I think it's quite unrealistic to expect that all in one person. I think it would be a lot easier to find a partner if you just focus on what makes a good parent and a good marriage. And if you're allowed to find your sexual needs in other places, as long as there are rules involved, I think it takes away a lot of the pressure in finding a partner. So I kind of share the East Asian mentality to this. I think the key to a long-lasting marriage is duty and responsibility. Most men are loyal not because they are loyal men, but because they don't have the opportunity to be with other women. I think most men, if put in a situation where they are pursued by attractive women and they know that nobody would find out, I think 90% of men would do it. It's just in our nature. I know that's gonna be quite controversial. I've personally never cheated on a partner before. However, I can understand the mentality behind it. I would also say that parents are heavily involved when it comes to choosing a partner. I think it's a little more intense in East Asia. I know traditionally, East Asian parents normally want people to date within their own race. Japan is notorious for this, Korea and China as well. Thankfully, because I grew up in America, my parents don't really care what race I marry. However, my cousins back in the Philippines, they have to marry Chinese or else they'll be disowned by their family. So a lot of that mindset still exists to this day. I think in Poland, the family's opinion is also quite important, but Polish people tend to be a lot more open, I would say, than East Asian people. But there is an exception, and I want to talk about the idea of white worship in East Asian countries. It is a common thing in China specifically that white people are heavily fetishized, particularly white men. You can see it in our beauty standards where we want to be as light-skinned as possible. And you can say that a lot of Asians are racist, but in East Asia, the only acceptable race to marry, honestly, is white. And I think this applies to white men and white women. I can't speak for the other East Asian countries, but I know in China there is an obsession with Europe in places like Hong Kong that were ruled by the British for a while, and more metropolitan cities like Shanghai. It is very common to see this interracial mix. Here in Poland, it's actually kind of the opposite. I wouldn't say that Asian people get worshipped here, but K-pop is very popular here. Asian men are seen as highly desirable, and I would argue Asian women as well. And when it comes to sex, I feel like Polish people are actually quite open to this conversation, but it's more like, all right, what you do in your sexual life is your business. In East Asia, it's still heavily taboo. I think Japan is the outlier in this because they have a very work hard and play hard culture. Japan is, I think, number 2 when it comes to the countries that watch porn the most. So they have like that dark side of their country. However, in open public, I think sex is still quite taboo. Okay, so let's talk about beauty standards and fashion for a little bit. Both of our cultures know how to dress up and dress down. So when we go out, we can dress well with nice clothes and the women can wear dresses and stuff. But it's also quite common if the woman wants to go to the żabka in the corner, she'll just wear pajamas or a hoodie and her slides. And this is very common all over Asia as well. Okay, so when it comes to men, in Korea, I would say there's more of a focus on like the gentleman, old money kind of look or the K-pop look, but it's usually just very minimalistic, but very refined and elegant. In Japan, I would say there's a lot more diversity in fashion. They have a grunge scene, they have a minimalist scene, but they're very hipster and experimental with their fashion as well. There's a lot of tech wear here. In China, I would say the focus is on streetwear, lots of expensive brands. There's kind of a meme of a Chinese immigrant student wearing like Gucci, Prada, Balenciaga, all these obnoxiously loud designer brands. But I think the men overall, we kind of have this refined look, but I think the people also like to dress like they're not trying too hard. Polish men honestly don't care about fashion that much. I think the younger generation is improving. Polish men just have a normal Eastern European man look. For the women in China, China, I think the businesswoman look is very popular, also being very like cutesy and elegant dresses like a lot of Slavic women. In Japan, I think the style is a lot more cute and cozy, but there's also like the e-girl and grunge scene. In Korea, the fashion is very elegant, put together, minimalistic, but very, very refined. I think in general, all of East Asian fashion emphasizes modesty. In Poland, you have a lot of grunge alternative girls, crop top and short shorts. Slavic women in general love to wear the dress. To me is amazing. So when it comes to beauty standards, in East Asia, being lighter skinned is better. There's a strong emphasis on skincare, generally being a lot thinner. There's a minority of people that care about curves or boobs like in Japan. I generally prefer thicker women. That's why I haven't really found Asian women that attractive because it's just not my preference for body type. I think here in Poland, the beauty standard for a woman is having an athletic body. Some women are curvier, some are thinner. Polish women are generally a little curvier than Asian women. And skincare and beauty seems to be a lot more important with the younger generation, and a lot of the women smoke. So that plus genetics means that they tend to age faster. But I think a lot of younger Polish women are putting a lot more emphasis on skincare and trying to retain their beauty. In Korea, plastic surgery is very common, unfortunately, with the nose, double eyelid surgery, maybe the cheeks, maybe getting some Botox. Here in Poland, plastic surgery is not that common. If they do get surgery, it's usually like lip filler or something to do with the nose. Something that is very interesting about East Asian culture, specifically in China and Korea, is that we are very materialistic. In Chinese culture, when it comes to relationship, money is extremely important, almost to an extreme. A lot of people complain that Chinese women are gold diggers, and I can see where that comes from, but I think a similar sentiment is shared in Russia, in Ukraine, where men are valued for what they provide to society, their accomplishments, and their money. Here in Poland, the people are a lot more modest and they don't really care about name brands that much. It's actually good to not flaunt your wealth here. I've heard it's because Polish people can be a little jealous about that. They look at things more from like practical usage rather than signaling for status. If you guys enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. I'm trying to reach 50,000 subscribers by the end of the month. I highly recommend that you guys watch this video next. Share your thoughts down below. Peace.